regardless of commodity or scale or marketing avenue, Louisiana Farm Bureau is working on behalf of all of our members, even those who are not members but are in production ag.
Welcome to the Louisiana Farm Bureau Podcast. I'm Allie Shipley, and today we are outside the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation's state office, which is the perfect setting to continue our celebration of Women's History Month, because today we are with Miss Amelia Kent. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and why this is the perfect setting for you?
In this past June at the Louisiana Farm Bureau Convention, I was elected as the third vice president of the Federation. So Farm Bureau is obviously quite special to me. And beyond that, my husband Russell, daughter Avery, and I raise beef cattle in and around Clinton, Louisiana.
Quite the perfect place. If we weren't on the farm, this is like the second best place, I feel like, to talk to you today. Let's talk a little bit about how you got here and how you got to that position and kind of just where your involvement with Farm Bureau really started.
I do have to preface, half of my childhood was in Colorado, and when my parents divorced, my mom moved home to her family's property in Tangipahoa Parish, and that was 1995. So I finished high school there, but then after leaving to go to college and coming back, and on about Plan D or E or F, I was pretty well grounded in and around a meet, so Tangipahoa Parish, and in that same time frame, I was building my own cow herd. Hurricane Katrina hit and flattened most of my family's pine timber, and also put a significant damage on the family's wholesale plant nursery. So while I still had interest out and about, as a post-college young adult should, I really was grounded. And fast forward by a year or two, a neighbor had taken me under his wing, so to speak, and encouraged me to apply for the LSU Ag Leadership Program. But in that same time frame, he'd also asked me to consider coming on to the Tangipahoa Parish Farm Bureau Board as the Young Farmer and Rancher Chair. So really in about September of 2007 into the beginning of 2008, that's how my path of leadership started.
That's awesome. See, I'm learning so much. Even just in lunch before this, I'm learning a lot about you.
Absolutely.
You kind of jumped into it a little bit, but can you kind of take us back to how you said you built your cattle herd, and how that interest sparked, and how you knew you wanted to be involved in agriculture, even kind of before then when you came back and did that?
So my interest in agriculture really started when I was a small child. My parents were a first-generation ranching business in Colorado. So I grew up in the Front Plains of Colorado, ranching, cowboy crews, getting checked into school late or checked out of school early so we could go load semis. I'd been on more feed yards than I can count by the time I could walk, I guess. So that interest was ingrained in me early, and I talked about multiple different paths, and my very first plan out of college was to go back to Colorado and run cattle with my dad. Not all family businesses work out. That one didn't pan out, but fast forward, and I had been running a very small cow herd with my mom in Tangipahoa Parish, and when I realized I was here for a longer while, I started expanding that effort and eventually picked up a lease of my own. So I really cannot pinpoint when my interest in agriculture started.
It kind of sounds like you were born into it, and while we're upset it didn't work out in Colorado, we're really glad that you're here and to have you, because you have definitely done a lot for this organization and agriculture as a whole, especially for women in the organization. You kind of touched on your grandma. You come from a long line of women in ag, and that's not always necessarily the case. We kind of joked at lunch that it's even less typical down here in the South for some reason for women to be in these traditionally men's roles, to say it no better than that. Not that it's not something women can't do, but it's not necessarily the norm here. And you run your cattle operation along with your husband, but you are the full-time farmer and rancher on your operation, and it looks like you have a daughter following in your footsteps too that loves being out there. What does it mean to be a woman in ag to you?
The short answer is it can be anything you want it to be. You talked about watching my grandmother and my mom. I mean, I've never known anything different. I have seen women in my family before me be hands-on, directly involved in production agriculture, and I've never known or seen anything different. And even a step before that, I referenced Colorado, and up there, it was all hands on deck, and it doesn't matter what you have between your legs. I remember young women, like teenagers and early 20s, running really heavy pieces of equipment, whether it's a large scale round baler, the big square baler, or a bale stack wagon, things that you don't really see down here that often, obviously the round balers, but other pieces of hay equipment that are more specific to drier areas, drier regions. And I remember those family ranch dynamics where they may or may not have had other children, like sons in the mix, but the daughters were all in. So that was a model for me early in my childhood and teenage years. But then, so I divide my youth into two chapters, the Colorado chapter and the Louisiana chapter. But when we moved down here, my grandmother and my grandfather had a wholesale plant nursery and a timber operation and a dairy. And now, granted, my grandma was not at all involved in the dairy, but she was intricate relative to the plant nursery. She was a propagator, and she was extremely well known and renowned in the field. So it's what I've seen.
You're downplaying her a little bit. Didn't you tell us at lunch she's the first woman that was inducted into the Louisiana Hall of Distinction?
She was.
Louisiana Ag Hall of Distinction?
Yes.
So this is nothing new. Strong women in ag is all that you've ever known, kind of as you hinted. Has there ever been a moment or a memory that has made you like step back and say, oh, I am a woman in a man's world? Has there ever been a moment or a story that sticks out that kind of is just like put that into perspective a little bit?
The more obvious answer to your question would be when I go to meetings. I was Louisiana's only representative to the Cattlemen's Beef Board from 2016 to 2021. The Cattlemen's Beef Board is the National Beef Checkoff Program, or the board that manages it, rather. And granted, there you saw more women, but especially when I got involved with the Louisiana Beef Industry Council, a council of 9 members, 10 if you include the commissioner. At most, there would be one other woman around the table with me. More often than not, it's one woman, and it's me. There are countless examples of being in producer settings, and I very much so am the producer and policy focus. So, like when we have livestock advisory committee meetings, we might have 40 or 50 people in it, maybe 10% women in attendance. That's your very apparent. That's a very easy answer to your question. But I also remember when my husband and I first started dating, and we were 60 miles from one another at that point, and I drove up with my own pickup and my own trailer, and people in the community did a double take. They didn't know how to process that.
It's a lot. I remember my first vehicle was a Toyota Tacoma so that I could bring pig shavings back and forth to the farm. And people, when I came to college, I didn't realize that was unusual. Not that I am nearly in the production ag side as you are, but even just growing up on a farm, I didn't think it was weird. My little sister still drives an F-150 and
Sure.
parked it on Sorority Row at LSU and still get some funny looks. So that's a really funny story, and I can only imagine. You kind of talked about being a woman in those boardrooms, especially. You are the only female on the Louisiana Farm Bureau's executive board, and you are also the second woman ever to serve in that role. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what that's been like and what that means to you, and also a little bit about Miss Linda and setting that example and being the first person to do that?
Let's start with Miss Linda. So Miss Linda Zonbreaker was in the role of third vice president when I first got involved, and even before I recognized what a rarity that was, or what an accomplishment that was, I recognized her as a role model and a force to be reckoned with. She is such a leader. She was such a leader and is still a role model in so many different respects. I mean, there aren't enough words to capture the sentiments I have. And I wasn't that close with her. She knew who I was. Obviously I know who she was. I've gotten to know some of her family pretty well too. But she despite being gone, she still leaves a mark.
It definitely speaks to her legacy for sure.
Absolutely.
Even I feel like I never personally met Miss Linda, but feel like I know the impact of her, and that's just how powerful she was. You felt like you knew her and the impact she made.
Absolutely. So on that note, I have done some things and been the first female to do something of that nature, but to not be and to have Miss Linda's path and of her, I guess, history and path to follow. I mean, that's almost a load lifted. I'm not scared. I have a life motto that, like, I march to my own beat, even if that means beating my own path.
I like that.
I don't have to beat this path. Ms. Linda already did it, right? And beyond that, thinking about my specific role relative to the executive committee, I don't see it as very different as when I sought leadership in the Livestock Advisory Committee. I'm interested in these topics and in the capacity of Livestock Advisory Committee. It's because I'm interested in livestock production and policy specific to that. And that's the path, kind of in conjunction and especially post Wife and R, I took. But thinking about the executive committee, one of the things I love most about Farm Bureau is that we represent the entire spectrum of agriculture and not just one commodity. And I bring that to that's the priority I bring to the executive committee. And obviously we have more responsibilities across multiple layers than just our own commodities or representing and advocating on behalf of agriculture. But to serve on the executive committee with farmers across commodities and across the state, to serve on behalf of farmers across all of the commodities across the entire state is very special to me.
I remember we were talking a little bit about AFBF, and you kind of talked about how y'all were recently, the exec committee was recently in DC before the administration changed, trying really hard to get a farm bill pushed. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. But you talked about how while the farm bill doesn't necessarily impact y'all as much as it was impacting our row crop farmers and the disaster relief and things like that, that they were there for y'all when y'all were going through a drought, and you were going to be there to help echo their voice. Can you kind of touch a little bit on that, kind of like you just mentioned, that we're all in this together as Farm Bureau?
So for those who do not know the statistic, it's less than 1.5% of our American population is engaged in direct production agriculture. And yes, to your point, in 2023, we were going through a historic drought in Louisiana that was heavily impacting all of the commodities, but relative to the structure of the Farm Bill and any support for livestock producers, the livestock producers are heavily dependent upon the drought monitor. And so we asked through your team, the PR team, to really push the conditions monitoring report through the drought monitor, which is pretty easy to do because we all watch the weather apps on our phones and maybe compare this one to that one. So let's take another few minutes to upload some pictures to the drought monitor in Nebraska to make sure that they understand the impacts that we have. And the Farm Bureau family came together in that time of need to help us get the map to where it needed to be to better reflect where we were, which was a significant lag, taking longer than it should have. So fast forward, and we're in really tough times for the row crop commodities relative to commodity prices in comparison to cost of production. And oh wait, we still don't have a farm bill. So going to Washington, D.C. to communicate that message of need to our congressional delegation is something I've had immense training to do, but really resonates whenever we're able to talk about the state of affairs at boots on the ground level and what some of the ramifications could be if we don't get the help that we need. So that's the beauty in the Farm Bureau family working across all of the commodities and helping each other out, because there aren't enough of us to fight this fight on our own.
And I think that's such a good example of the Farm Bureau family, and that we're all helping each other out and we all have a common interest, even if they're a little different at times and the needs are a little different. If people haven't gathered yet, you're pretty busy. You're in DC, you were somewhere last week when we were trying to schedule this podcast. You serve in a lot of different capacities in conjunction with being the third vice president of the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation, being a cattle producer, being a wife, and being a mom. You're busy, and these things take time. Why do you invest your time in the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation and just the greater ag community and advocacy that you do? Because it takes a lot of your time, even if you don't admit it. We know that you're busy a lot and gone on the road a lot.
I don't know if Joe Mapes coined this, but it's one of his favorite sayings, which is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that is incredibly resonating for a cattle producer like myself. But let's take a step back. I went to college outside of Boston with incredibly intelligent people who have gone on to admirable careers. Some of my college classmates are doing things people dream about. When I grow up, I want to do something spectacular, and I have classmates that are doing those things, right? And despite their incredible intelligence, the mind-boggling experience I walked away from my 4 years in college with is these same incredibly intelligent people genuinely believe the food chain starts at the grocery store. And granted, the small family farm that my mom's sister and I had, and my mom still has in Amite, was very different than what my parents' ranch looked like in Colorado. But the fact that, even fast forward, I was having a conversation with my college roommate a few weeks ago about the bird flu, of all things, and another class.
It's a hot topic right now.
Hot topic. And she was talking about another classmate of ours who lives in New York, I believe, being worried about her cat contracting bird flu because of the cat food. It was I could not have concocted this story if I would have tried. I could not have. And my college roommate comes from central Pennsylvania and a lot of row crop and dairy country. So even though she doesn't come from direct production ag, she understands it a lot better than obviously our other classmate. But things like that, just farm kids don't think about that. I never thought about it. I would venture a guess that you probably didn't either. So my motivation for advocacy and showing up goes back to really smart people having zero clue about what we do day in and day out. I recognize I have a unique perspective. I joke that I'm a melting pot of different experiences.
I think that's a really good example.
But I can bring that to the table. I can be in a pasture or sitting on a tractor or doing whatever any random day entails and have a dialogue with Congresswoman Letlow's staff about whatever legislative topic of the day is bothering me. Literally, Cade texted me yesterday just wanting to see how things are going. And the concern of the moment is how tariffs are going to impact direct production costs and marketing access. So I was able to convey that to him. That's special. That is a result of coming up through the Young Farmers and Ranchers program and several other training avenues along the way. But those relationships matter. And that's, again, it goes back to that college experience. But how can I voice my own needs, but that of others in a constructive way that is impactful?
I think that's so important and just kind of speaks to the mission of Farm Bureau, and you're such a great example of that, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that. If a young producer were to come to you or you were to talk to a young producer about getting involved in Farm Bureau and they're like, I'm not sure if that's for me, or I don't really have the time or the skill set, what would you tell them to convey that need or that the importance of that time investment? Because it is an investment, and farmers are busy. Everyone's busy, and time is a huge commodity to spend.
It is. So I think about that. Even in comparing Russell and myself, Russell is incredibly supportive, but he's the first to admit that he doesn't have the interest in serving in some of the capacities I serve. But he's proud that I do. So that's a close to home example. But I think about, so we only have one child, and she keeps us busy. And I had a conversation this morning with a mom of about to be number 3, like 2 weeks away. And I don't understand how parents do what they do. One or multiples, it's beyond me. So when people say they're too busy or they're chasing kids or like extracurriculars are busier than they've ever been, I get that and I respect that. But there are so many different opportunities and avenues that aren't super time consuming. So obviously the path I've taken has a lot of direct in-person trainings and experience along the way. But you referenced Washington, D.C. and that November fly-in and the messaging towards the end of the year that ultimately got included in that final continuing resolution and like the last hour.
The Christmas gift we were all hoping for.
Yes. Better than the cow that stole Christmas. That's a whole nother story. But I bring that up as an example, the voter voice effort. I mean, how many of us have smartphones glued in our back pockets or glued to our hands at any given point? The voter voice is a perfect example of how you can engage and participate and voice your needs and opinions with a couple of clicks. So it's our responsibility, as much as your team as it is back on us in our leadership positions, it's our responsibility to get that messaging out, that you have tools as simple as voter voice. But, oh, wait, what if we have that state Young Farmers and Ranchers State Capitol Day in Baton Rouge? Or for the YF&R State Committee, the fly-ins. I mean, I am also involved in Land O'Lakes governance at this, which was my meeting last week, but I have naturally gravitated to their Policies and Resolutions Committee because of all of my YF&R DC fly-ins, because I love them. And I can bring that experience to another ag-focused channel. So it's Farm Bureau can be as much or as little as you want it to be.
I think that's such an important note because we've said it a lot of times in these podcasts the last few days. We don't have to marry. We can date for a little while, and you can come see the door. There's a seat for everyone at our table, and it can be as big of a seat as you want or as small of a seat. Just get in the door and come see what it's about, because if you are in agriculture, you benefit from Farm Bureau.
Absolutely.
And there's something here for you.
Well, and I'll take it a step further. Kirk Kendry, the vice president of sales on the insurance side, he has a say. He was my original agency manager. So
Small world, it's coming full circle.
Yes, but he has a saying: if you ate today, you need to be a Farm Bureau member. That's a bit of a stretch, but I know where I agree with it, because at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day,
3 times a day.
3 times a day, the food in your fridge and in your house on your plate had to come from somewhere. And that gets back to my college experience and people not knowing that the food chains exist prior to the grocery store. So it's all full circle. But,
it is.
Whether or not agrarians know it, Farm Bureau is working on your behalf. And I firmly believe that regardless of commodity or scale or marketing avenue, Louisiana Farm Bureau is working on behalf of all of our members, and even those who are not members but are in production ag.
I think you're very right. Just from what I see in this building and what you are doing out there, I think a lot of people are benefiting from the work that's done through this organization, both on the grassroots level, the state level, the national level. It's working on all levels for the good of all that are involved. The reason we're here today, I feel like, was National Women's History Month. We've talked a lot about Farm Bureau, which is great too. But let's kind of turn back to that a little bit. As a mom of a little girl and as a woman in ag, what do you hope that she or any woman that's considering production ag or being involved in ag in any capacity, what do you hope they know as a woman in the field? Or what advice do you have for them?
The opportunities are endless. I mean, they're kind of like, it's as much, Farm Bureau is as much or as little as you want it to be. The constructs are only as big or as little as you make them. Not to say it will be easy. That may or may not be the case, but my thought in that regard is very similar to the concept of the world is your oyster. Just make it your own, make it happen. There may be some, I guess, local social pushback or lack of understanding, but then if you go elsewhere in the world, elsewhere in the country, those stereotypes are blown apart. So I try not to put too much regard on the stereotypes. You do you, I do me. And relative to Avery, I mean, if you ask her favorite thing in the world, it is to go chase cows on horses with my people.
I saw some videos. She's doing it.
She's doing it with her people. So, I mean, and if that, we love it because that means we don't have to pawn her off on friends and family at some god-awful hour in the morning. But if this is something that her interest continues on as she approaches adulthood, then we'll do everything we can to facilitate her and give her a foundation that will benefit. And if she wants nothing to do with agriculture and wants to go do something completely unrelated, we're happy with that too. And we'll give her the best foundation we can. No pressure.
But she'll know where her food comes from and she won't think it starts in the grocery store. And I think that's important too.
No, I'm pretty sure she was asking, I pulled meat out of the freezer and she was asking which one it came from.
Ag kids are built different, I think. They understand the life circle a lot.
Our cow vet is also our parish Farm Bureau president, so she knows him as Dr. Justin. And I had her in the truck with me in the fall and called him on speaker because I had a cow with prolapse. And so I called for a vet call. It was going to be a little while. But she's like, why did you call Dr. Justin? And I said, well, there's a hurt cow. Oh, I want to go see it. And so we had to turn around. What's that red thing? I'm like, yes. So farm kids are built different.
They are. They understand it, I guess. There are different things. We understand a lot about ag, that's for sure. Is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you think is important for the listeners to know about you, to know about anything we've talked about?
So we talked a lot about Farm Bureau, but the opportunities and the avenues within that, we didn't spend a lot of time on, but that also is a broad spectrum, whether it's the Women's Committee or Ag in the Classroom or the various commodity committees. Then we have our issues advisories, like I guess it's coastal conservation and then labor. If it's a concern, we have it. So I'd like to think that we have all of the opportunities available to match the interest of producers and those who work in our allied industries. So like I said, Farm Bureau is incredibly important to me and has really given me the foundation in leadership and advocacy training that has helped me help facilitate other opportunities down the road.
That's a lot of credit to give Farm Bureau, because if anybody knows you, they know that you are quite the leader and quite the advocate and on a lot of different stages. So that speaks volumes to Farm Bureau if that's who you're crediting for a lot of your success here.
I won't say all of it, but a lot of it. Seriously, in various avenues I've been in on a national stage, people regularly ask if my involvement started with Farm Bureau, and I guess that's a contribution to trainings at the AFBF level and at the state Farm Bureau's levels. So.
Well, we are so glad that you were with us today. We're so glad that you're a woman in ag, and we're just so glad that you're on our board and helping move the needle of ag and changing those stereotypes that we don't really think matter anymore. So thank you so much for visiting with us today and for being a part of the Farm Bureau family.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to learn more about any of the avenues that Amelia referenced, we will have those links for you here. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Louisiana Farm Bureau Podcast.